Well, for everybody who's listening right now and watching, so Microsoft Teams does this thing where they change things and they don't really give us a heads up about it. So we're dealing with this a little differently today. So we do realize that thank you, Jason, for letting us know that you guys could hear us before you could see us. That used to be a feature we could turn on and off, and we can't, at least this month. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started with the regular program, and then I'll kind of edit out all the other things before we post this on ESI's YouTube page. So for those of you that don't know, which I think all of you watching have seen this before, but my name's Jackie, and I'll be kind of walking us through this Equipped Live for the month of August. Greg, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so this is our last Equipped Live with the questions that we had submitted from Omni and Quest. So they had gotten together and given us a whole list of questions. We've got one we're going to kind of go back to. We skipped over it. I skipped over it. And then we'll get into three that are really similar, and it has to do with employee compensation. So first question we're going to get into is, so the question is worded, with tech and resources constantly expanding, are there plans to allocate some of those resources to further or expand on tech or development within the IFMC?
And I think the answer is yes. And
we have on that.
Yeah, and that I am a little bit confused by that question, but I think I'll do the best I can here. Of course, historically, we have been adding new technology in the form of CNC equipment. We've got some robotics now. We've been adding artificial intelligence, and the little misunderstandings with how this meeting works is an example of some of that maybe more leading edge technology that we're participating in with Microsoft and with UKG, where we're now setting up the human resources software, et cetera. And as I understand it right now, we have our minimum viable product for a smart contract for a lease. And that's pretty fresh technology, pretty leading edge. Now, one of the things that we do is we always try to invest in new technology where it makes financial sense for us and where it'll help to generate bonuses. So there's plenty of opportunities to invest in cool technology that really doesn't make financial sense and isn't going to generate bonuses, but it would be fun. We try to steer clear of that. And if we use maybe some terminology from what's called the technology adoption life cycle, which is a standard way of measuring technology adoption, we tend to be in the early majority, and sometimes we're in the early adopter stage, and sometimes even in the innovator level. And the way those levels are broken up is innovators are considered to be the first 2.5% of customers that adopt a new technology. Early adopters are the next 13.5%. Early majority is 34%. So now that's the first 50% of adoption of new technology. So like I say, we tend to be in that early majority, but sometimes we're in the early adopter, and in the case of Coveron, where we're working with a new composition of matter, I mean, we're in the first 0.1 of 1%. I mean, so we're really at the leading edge there. So we've got a mix of that, but that's how that gets measured. We also have a half dozen impact teams that their focus is on process innovation and new product innovation. And so they're trying to turn ideas into concepts, which turn into experiments, and then prototypes, and then products, and then eventually, hopefully, companies.
So this is just expanding on that question a little bit. So what's the process for somebody who maybe doesn't do this every day, where they're not on one of those teams that's specifically looking at some of this technology, but they say, you know, gosh, my job would be a lot easier if we adopted this technology that I have some experience with elsewhere or something. What would be that process for somebody to maybe get that tested out in the IFMC?
Great question. And one of the new innovations that will help us with that will be UKG, the human resources software, and the ability to look for subject matter experts on the topic that you're interested in or that the innovation would be involved with.
Okay. I know that program is not rolled out yet for the HR program, but there will be information about it. There'll be an article about it in Equipped. So if people want more information, or maybe we'll talk about it here at some point too. So just keep your eyes out for that. So the next three questions, the final three in this list from Omni and Quest, are really all about compensation for employees. And so the first question is, and they really all go well together, but are there any efforts to create more consistent pay scales throughout the IFMC?
Yes, but likely not in the way that a number of people might think. And so I need to start with just a little bit of context here. I remind everyone that the IFMC is a consortium, and we treat it like an economy. So it's not a company, but each company within the IFMC is striving to be so good at one competency that nobody else can compete with them. And so in order to achieve that level of competency, obviously you need pretty competent team members. So the yes to the question would be through normal free market forces and through what's called the theory of perfect information. And I can get back to that after just a little bit here, but the answer would be no from a unitary economy wage control perspective. And so if I do just a little more background on that, if you look at the economies in the world, you can put those into three big groups. And the one is unitary economies, the other is federal, and the other is confederal. So unitary economies are like China or Japan or United Kingdom, where you've got one leader that exercises unitary control over all of the units of government. In a federal system that operates like the United States, which most people are pretty familiar with that. You've got 50 states. The states all have a pretty significant number of rights, and certainly citizens have a lot of rights. And the federal government has somewhat limited authority to rule, if you will. Although that does change over time, it does tend toward unitary. The third type is the confederal, and the good examples of that would be the European Union, which my guess is a lot of people are accustomed to that or familiar with that. What they may be less familiar with is the Commonwealth of Independent States. And those are the countries that formerly were part of the Soviet Union. And so they cooperate in a confederal or just a loosely net organization or a consortium. So if we look at the IFMC as a consortium and we look at the concept of a confederal economy, that's really what the IFMC is. And it's made up of a number of value streams with companies in those value streams. Those companies behave in a unitary, for the most part, behave in a unitary fashion, and maybe the value streams might behave in more of a federal fashion. So back to the question, are there plans to try to control pay scales from the IFMC level? No, not from a unitary wage perspective or wage control perspective. And there are some pretty significant horror stories of governments that have imposed wage controls. And I don't think we want to relive those experiences inside the IFMC. But the answer is yes, from a perfect information in a confederal economy. And a good example of perfect information is if you drive down the street, you see two gas stations, or maybe sometimes four gas stations at an intersection, and they all have their prices posted. Well, that's about as close to perfect information and perfect competition as you're going to get, because you've got a commodity, gas, and you know the consumer knows the price as they're pulling up to that intersection.
So historically, there was in the IFMC some really people would frown upon people leaving one IBU to go to another business, especially if it was only driven by wage. But that in the last 3 or 4 years has really loosened up a lot. And I think people are understanding more that the free market system that's really is the IFMC. So it's been interesting to watch that shift. But one of the things that does happen, and this next question alludes to this, but why are there instances of new employees with less experience or little experience getting starting pay offers at higher rates than experienced long-term and valuable employees?
I would hope that that's because of the circles of competency for each of the individuals involved. A reminder here of our definition of competency is knowledge multiplied by skill, multiplied by the ability to execute. And so if we assume that, and now we, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we've got a number of companies that are striving to be so good at some product, some service, that there is no competition for it. So they're striving to be very, very good at a unique offering. That unique offering requires unique skills. And those unique skills aren't always obvious to a casual observer. And so it's pretty easy for misunderstandings to develop over that. And maybe a good example that a lot of people might be familiar with would be the Olympics and Olympic medals. If we need somebody that can swim really, really fast and has a proven record of it, proven ability to execute, Michael Phelps, 28 Olympic medals. Closest competitor at swimming, 14 medals. So Michael Phelps clearly is superior with his ability to swim fast. And so if you absolutely have to get there swimming, he'd be your guy. To a casual observer that maybe doesn't know the actual numbers, Michael Phelps probably looks like he's in pretty good shape, but he looks kind of like a normal guy. And so I think those kind of misunderstandings can happen. And I think we need to be aware of that. But what might even be more valuable than Michael Phelps would be the very small number of people who have medaled at multiple sports in the Olympics. And so now you've got essentially a utility player. So if we apply that to our own organization, you can maybe start to understand how that could be confusing. I think to really address the question that was asked, we need to look at each individual claim and just try to get to the bottom of it and make sure it's well, just understand the facts.
Well, I think the final question in this area kind of gets to some of this as well and what's happened in the last several years in our society with wages. In your opinion, has employee compensation in the IFMC kept up with economic inflation, and what's being done to assure that it has?
Well, for some people, yes, and for others, no. So in other words, some have come out or have kept up with inflation, maybe even exceeded inflation, others have not. And I think that really depends on each individual's willingness and ability to adapt to ever-changing markets. If we look around us today, I would describe the markets today as volatile. And if you look at what happens in the volatile market, there's considerable change in the demand for products, which those changes in product demand result in changes in demand for certain types of competencies. The good news is that the IFMC tends to do first-of-a-kind products, one-of-a-kind, and small batch. And when a customer, a company is changing their product offering, they need to make first-of-a-kind, one-of-a-kind, and small batch to get started. And if not with the product itself, with the machines that are involved with that production. So the IFMC tends to do pretty well in volatile times for that reason. Maybe some historic examples of that are outside the IFMC would be, and this dates back quite a ways, but there used to be switchboard operators, and we had those in Alpena. There's still a building downtown that where the switchboard operators worked out of. There used to be payphone repairmen. Used to be video store clerk, elevator operators, typists. But the demand for those today is pretty weak. And so the compensation, my guess is those are so extreme that they probably don't even exist anymore. But if they did, the compensation certainly would not have kept up with inflation. There are roles, though, where we're beating inflation, and certainly the extremes of that would be the new technology like blockchain development, machine learning specialists, cybersecurity, robotics engineering. Those are the things that there's a real demand for those kind of competencies now, but the supply still isn't there. And if we look at historic examples in the IFMC, it wasn't, well, I've been around for 5 decades, so it doesn't seem that long to me, but we used to have what we call conventional machining equipment, and there, a craftsman level machinist was very, very valuable. As we've transitioned to the CNC equipment, some of those craftsmen took it upon themselves to learn about programming and how to run the CNC equipment and increase their value considerably. Others that maybe were allergic to computers may most likely have not kept up with inflation, maybe have moved on to other jobs, other roles. And we can look at welding the same way and a number of other examples. So it really depends on the individual. I want to pay everybody 2 times the market rate. But we need to provide enough value to the customers so that they'll pay us for that. The key limitation to that is competency.
Mm-hmm.
The answer here for individuals in keeping up with inflation or falling behind really is their willingness and ability to be competent for the new demand, the new competency demands. So the other question that was asked is what's being done about it. this is a pretty general answer, but really from a company level, we're always striving to find the greatest customer needs and satisfy those. But our ability, our performance there really depends on what the team members, the competencies the team members have. But the better we are at solving those new needs, the more the customers will pay us, and it'll keep us ahead of inflation.
So I think we could have a very long conversation about this topic, and there's probably additional questions. And so that's a great segue into future Equipped Live. If we don't receive more questions, we'll go back to kind of predetermined topics. If anybody has additional questions they want to submit for future Equipped Lives, please feel free to send those to me. And we can get those answered with Greg in future Equipped Lives. So that being said, we're past our time, which I say every single month. I don't know why we don't just extend the time, but that's okay. So Greg, thank you so much for participating and joining us tonight. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make?
Just that free markets and capitalism, I think, are a wonderful thing. And that's because the more we help our customers solve their problems, the more money they send to us. And as a bonus, the happier we are, because that to use one of your words, Jackie, the intrinsic value of helping others is a tremendous reward in addition to the money. So the best way to increase our compensation and stay ahead of inflation is do a really good job of helping our customers be successful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. We will get a date out to everybody for the September Equipped Live. And with that, everybody have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.